the national motto of France: liberty, equality, fraternity. The very tenets that many First Republic revolutionaries wanted for the French people. These societal pillars would shape the future of France forever. Liberty, equality, and fraternity became cultural and societal. The government itself was expected to hold up those tenets of liberty, equality, and fraternity. All of these things are going to be very important to keep in mind, because on October 17th, 1961, in Paris, those tenets of liberty, equality, and fraternity seemed to be completely abandoned. France, officially known as the French Republic, is a country located in Western Europe, and unlike their European counterparts post-World War II, France maintained some of its overseas territories, those being French Guiana in South America, Saint-Pierre and Miquelon in the North Atlantic, the French West Indies, and many islands in Oceania and the Indian Ocean, giving it one of the largest discontinuous exclusive economic zones in the world. But that wasn't always the case. Before World War I and World War II, the French overseas territorial holdings were much larger, and most of them could be found in North Africa. One overseas territory in particular gave the French Republic a lot of trouble when it came to placating its population and assimilating the territory into the French Republic, that nation being Algeria. And the current French president at the time, Charles de Gaulle, acknowledged the value of having Algeria within the French Republic. The economic capital that could be extracted from this nation was simply too valuable to lose. But in order to maintain this territory as a portion of France, a certain rebellion would have to be put down and a certain war would have to be fought.
Algiers, a busy piece of metropolitan France transplanted across the Mediterranean. Frenchmen have lived and ruled here since 1830. More than 1 million Frenchmen in Algiers rub elbows with more than 10 million Muslims. Man on horseback, symbol of France, stands in Algiers' main square. On the surface, Muslim and Frenchmen live well together. They shop in the same stores. Street cafes on a quiet afternoon, even a milk bar. The Casbah, the Muslim quarter, locale of 1,000 adventure stories. A part of the non-French past.
This is the National Liberation Front, commonly known by the French acronym FLN, was a nationalist political party in Algeria, and this political party had one motivation in mind: complete and utter separation from the French government, and hopefully the establishment of an independent Arab Algerian state. But what was the true motivation for Algerians to join the FLN and ultimately decide to protest and then fight the French government for Algerian independence? The King of France in 1830, Charles X, was interested in expanding the then French Empire into North Africa. In 1827, 3 years before the invasion had begun, the French military and the French government needed a reason to invade Algeria, and Barbary pirate activity in the Mediterranean would be a good reason in order to occupy the nation of Algeria for a short period of time to prevent any more ransoming of Christian captives and slaves, along with sequestering all of the piracy activity coming out of that nation and harming trade within the Mediterranean. By 1830, though, people were wise to the real motives that the French government had in Algeria. You see, it wasn't about piracy. It was meant to distract and assuage all foreign conquest of Algeria. You see, other European powers were looking at this nation as a potential colony as well, and France wanted to have the first opportunity to take it and assimilate it into the then French Empire. In June of 1830, the French attacked and captured Algiers, one of the major cities in Algeria. In the following years, the conquest spread to the interior, directed by Marshal Bougard, who became the first governor general of Algeria. The conquest was violent and marked by a scorched earth policy designed to reduce the power of native rulers, the Dey, including massacres, mass assaults of women and children, and other terrible atrocities. Between 500,000 and 1 million from approximately 3 million Algerians were killed in the first 3 decades of the conquest. French losses from 1830 to 1851 were much lower, with only 4,000 French soldiers killed in action, and from there, Algeria became a French colony. And the way that France deals with overseas colonies is a lot different from other European nations. French overseas territories, on paper, weren't necessarily treated as colonies, or at least described as colonies. Citizens of overseas territories were French, and they were subject to French law, and their personhood was equivalent to those of French citizens on the European continent. Yet with that being coded into law, the overall treatment of Algerians didn't change, both within the nation of France and outside the nation of France, specifically in Algeria. These people were equal on paper, but treated as second-class citizens. This would be codified under the Second Empire of France between 1852 and 1871. The Indigenous Code would be the document that would control the activities and behaviors of those who lived in Algeria. It allowed Muslims to apply for full French citizenship, a measure that few took since it involved renouncing the right to be governed by Sharia law and personal matters, and many Algerians considered it to be apostasy, because its first article stipulated that the indigenous Muslim is French, however, he will continue to be subjugated to Muslim law. He may be admitted to serve in the army and the navy, he may be called to functions and civil employment in Algeria, he may, on his demand, be admitted to enjoy the rights of the French citizen. In this case, he is subjected to the political and civil laws of France. This 1865 document would last all the way up until World War II. The French government would expand the rights of Algerians on March 7, 1944, which granted French citizenship to all subjects of France territories and overseas departments. Over the course of 3 years, the French Constitution would update its initial rules saying that you would have to denounce Sharia law and Muslim faith in order to become a French citizen. That stipulation no longer applied. Therefore, all Algerian citizens within the nation of Algeria and the nation of France were all equal citizens under the law. Yet, the Algerian people still felt as if they were being treated unfairly by the French. The Algerian parliament would consist of 3 major groups: French politicians occupying 50% of the seats, 25% of the seats would be occupied by elite Algerians that are French aligned, and the final 25% by Algerian religious officials. This political circumstance in Algeria would incite the growth of the FLN because normal Algerians felt that they weren't being represented in their home nation, let alone France. And their political actions in Algeria would lead to the Algerian War, a war that would last 7 years, resulting in hundreds of thousands of Algerian deaths and tens of thousands of French deaths. And for the entire duration of the war, the French military was incredibly frustrated with their lack of success. The Algerians were simply not giving up, and something had to be done. The French military simply wasn't enough when it came to quelling all of the rebellion that was happening in their overseas territory, and they needed something to galvanize help from their European counterparts and the world at large, which at the time either didn't care about what was happening in Algeria or wanted Algeria to become an independent nation. So the opinion of the Algerians had to be changed. The opinion of the FLN had to be changed in order for additional support to come in so that the French military would have somewhat of a chance in maintaining their control over Algeria. This is Maurice Papon, born September 3rd, 1910, the son of a solicitor who became an industrialist, and 9 years later, his father would be elected to become mayor of the commune and held that office until 1937. Maurice Papon studied at the Lycée Louis le Grand in Paris. This is where Maurice Papon would begin to grow his network and find many powerful individuals who would ultimately join Charles de Gaulle's cabinet after the war. While becoming friends or associates with all of these powerful people, he studied law, psychology, and sociology at school. After Maurice Papon graduated, he would enter public service at the age of 20. And would be quickly promoted, not only because of his merit, but also because of his network. In February 1931, he worked in the cabinet of the Minister of Air. He would also be named in the Ministry of the Interior in July of 1935, before he became Chief of Staff of the Deputy Director of the Departmental and Communal Affairs in January 1936. It wouldn't be until August 22nd, 1939, where the mobilization of the 2nd Colonial Infantry Regiment that Maurice Papon would be told to be sent to Tripoli, located in French Lebanon. He would then be assigned to the direct French Secret Services in Ras Al Ain, in the north of French Syria. Once he was appointed to that position, France would be officially captured by the German military, and then the fall of France would demobilize him and make him return to France by October of 1940. At this point, he had become very accustomed to political power and opted to serve in the Vichy government, where he and many of his mentors and friends would collaborate with German military when it came to the subjugation of the French people. Many at this time would consider him a collaborationist, and that would be true. A confidential report from the German military shows that in April 1943, he even identified himself as a collaborationist during personal or official conversations. Another document from July 1943 called him a good negotiator, and those negotiations all dealt with the Jewish question in France. During World War II, Maurice Papon would eventually be appointed as senior police official in the Vichy regime, with the specific task of supervising and facilitating the answer to the Jewish question within German-occupied France. And the way that he went about doing that is using the Vichy's police department to raid Jewish neighborhoods and track down Jewish people in order to be sent to concentration camps within France and within Germany. With authority over Jewish affairs, Maurice Papon regularly collaborated with German SS officers, which was responsible for the extermination of Jews under his command, with about 1,500 Jews being deported to German and French concentration camps and internment camps. While the German military was ultimately in control, the French police at the time was the most efficient and violent group used in order to rid Vichy France and France as a whole of the Jewish population living there, with every single operation being rubber-stamped by Maurice Papon. And during this entire time of collaborating with the German military, Maurice Papon would learn how the German military subjugated populations, how the German military would put down rebellion. After the war, Maurice Papon attempted to distance himself from his collaboration with the German military in the Vichy government of France. He would go on to say that he was actually a French resistance fighter and that he had nothing to do with the massive deportations of French Jews to Germany, Poland, and other concentration camps within France. The active president at the time, Charles de Gaulle, wanted to maintain Maurice Papon's position as chief of police because of his effectiveness in controlling the population of France, both resistance fighters and non-resistance fighters. Charles de Gaulle and other major French officials were very aware of what Maurice Papon did during World War II, but decided to look the other way due to his effectiveness in controlling a population. His record was not unknown, and it was going to be useful, especially in Algeria when he would be appointed as vice director of Algeria in 1945, with the expressed task of putting down the resistance fighters, the FLN, during the Algerian War. Between the years of 1945 and 1958, Maurice Papon would gradually gain more power in the sense that he would be able to establish a police department in France and a police department in Algeria, with both departments using the same tactics that the German military used against French civilians during the French occupation in World War II. On August 25th, 1958, an FLN offensive in Paris attacked 3 policemen on the Boulevard des Hospitals. Maurice Papon and the French police department would retaliate immediately by raiding 5,000 Algerian homes, forcibly arresting the people inside, and then keeping them at the former Bajon hospital, where they would be beaten, intimidated, and ultimately deported out of the nation. Now, this had never happened in France before against the Algerians. This was common in the Algerian territory, though, where the police department there would arrest anyone who they thought was associated with the FLN, torture them ruthlessly, and then place them in internment camps for processing. Actions that were reminiscent of what happened in Vichy France and France as a whole under German military occupation. The French police department and Maurice Papon simply used the same methodology and tactics brought against the Jews in France during World War II and deployed those tactics instead to Algerians and those who were supposedly a part of the FLN. In response to even more bombings and even more attacks against the police department, the French Auxiliary Police Force would be established in 1959. This special constabulary force, under the authority of the Algerian Affairs Coordination Center of the Prefecture Police, which was under the control of Maurice Papon, was made up of new and old police officers who believed that there needed to be some more extreme measures taken against Algerians living in France and living in Algeria, with the belief being that many Algerian French citizens supported the FLN and they ought to be controlled, especially because the Algerian War was not looking good for the French military and the French government. They were losing and in desperate need of not only international support, but just overall control over the Algerian nation and Algerian people within France. So something had to be done. There had to be a reason to retaliate and expel all Algerians from France, all while completely destabilizing the FLN, thereby changing the course of the war. And that particular plan and action took place on October 17th, 1961, otherwise known as the Paris Massacre of 1961. A little bit before that, though, on October 5th, many curfews were placed against Algerians living in Paris, curfews that actually violated the French Constitution at that time. Algerians were not allowed to be outside between the hours of 8:30 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. Algerians were restricted from entering public areas like parks and theaters, and if they were to be seen there, they could be arrested, then taken to a warehouse controlled by the French police department, where they would be tortured and then deported. Over 150,000 Algerians were living in Paris at the time, and arresting all of them just wasn't feasible. And within that population, there were supporters of the FLN, but not all of them. This wasn't a concern for Maurice Papon or the French police department, because what they wanted to do was create an event that would merit a retaliation from the FLN that the French government could point to as a reason for even more violence being brought against the Algerians living in Algeria. So, a little over a week later, on October 17th, 1961, the French police finally got the news that they wanted, that there would be an FLN organization in the middle of Paris. A massive protest of Algerians supporting the FLN, shouting their grievances against the French police department, the French government, and their overall desire of independence from the French government. They wanted Algeria to be independent and free from all of the tyranny that the French government had placed upon it in order to subdue and assimilate the nation. According to the historian Jean-Luc Analdi, Maurice Papon had managed to gather 7,000 policemen in the middle of Paris to control this protest. And what ultimately began as population control turned into a complete block of the demonstration, and from there, massive arrests. The police forces blocked all access to the capital, metro stations, train stations, and any other means of leaving the city center. And with nowhere to go, 30 to 40,000 Algerians protesting that day were stuck in the middle of the city. Algerians outside of the city center who didn't protest were also arrested. Their houses were raided and they were placed on buses and taken directly to internment centers that were operated under the Vichy government. Those detained were not only Algerians, but also Moroccan and Tunisian immigrants, who were then sent to various police stations and a major sports stadium in Versailles. From there, the Algerians, who were taken from their homes outside of the political protest, had their documents taken, their personal possessions confiscated, and they were all told that they were enemies of the state and they were meant to be deported back to Algeria. Those who resisted were beaten, tortured, or killed. We do not know what happened in those internment camps to those 11,000 people. We just know that they disappeared, and those who we have pictures of were on buses or planes back to Algeria. The other 30 to 40,000 protesting individuals in the middle of France had similar things done to them. They were placed on buses as well and transported to internment zones where they had their documents taken, beaten, tortured, and killed. There were many Algerians who capitulated and just accepted the arrest. We don't know what happened to them. To those who resisted, the arrest and ultimate deportation had to endure an even worse fate. They didn't have their documents taken. They weren't even arrested. They were just killed. Many of them would be shot, many of them would be beaten to death, and those who were dying or almost dying would be tossed off of the Pont Saint-Michel for their bodies to sink and then float all the way down the Seine. Now, the night of October 17th, there were a lot of deaths, but the deaths would continue to grow over the course of the week, and that number of deaths is still unclear. Police archives at the time were manipulated to reflect a much lower number of casualties than reality. Some people who had been killed were also on the list of people deported to Algeria, but it's estimated between 150 and 300 Algerians were detained and or shot to death, with an additional 70 to 84 people killed after having been thrown into the Seine. And I want to impress upon you just how much we don't know when it comes to the casualty count of this terrible event. Most of the manipulation done by the police was manipulation in death records. You see, over the course of a couple of weeks, bodies of Algerians would wash up on the Seine, and their deaths would all be accidental or intentional. The number would grow day by day, and yet every body pulled out of the Seine was an accidental death. Even the bodies with bullet hole wounds and broken arms and legs, all of them were deemed accidental. And those who were deported, or those who were tortured to death, they didn't have documents to prove that they existed. So we don't know who actually was deported, and we don't know who actually died in the internment zones facilitated and owned by the French police. There were photos of this event. There were eyewitness accounts, but a lot of them were completely ignored by the French media. But what couldn't be ignored was the fact that it was still in living memory, at least to someone who wrote this on the Pont Saint-Michel. Here we drown Algerians. We don't know who wrote this on the bridge, but we do know that it happened quickly after the event, between October 18th and October 19th of 1961. The graffiti would be washed away quickly after, but periodically people would continue to write this on the bridge. Here we drown Algerians. And for the longest time, this was the biggest evidence of what happened that night. There were pictures, but they weren't widely distributed. There were eyewitness accounts, but they weren't taken or said. Yet this message remained. And some historians think that this message, being written on the bridge consistently, regardless of how many times it was taken down, encouraged one police officer to share his eyewitness account about what happened that night. And this is what he had to say. What happened on October 17th, 1961, and in the following days against peaceful demonstrators, on whom no weapons were found, compels us to bear witness and alert public opinion. We can no longer remain silent about these heinous acts, which risk becoming common practice and tarnishing the honor of the entire police force. Today, although to varying degrees, the press is publishing revelations, letters from readers, and demands for explanations. The outrage is spreading amongst honest individuals of all opinions. Among our ranks, the majority are deeply disturbed. Some are even beginning to doubt the value of their uniform. All those responsible must be punished. Punishment must extend to everyone responsible. Those who gave the orders, those who pretend to ignore or allow such actions, no matter how high-ranking they are. Among the thousands of Algerians taken to the exhibition park at the Porte de Versailles, dozens were killed by blows from rifle butts and pickaxe handles, by fractured skulls, ruptured livers, and spleens and broken limbs. Their bodies were trampled under the watchful eye of Mr. Paris, the general police supervisor. Others had their fingers cut off by members of the security forces, police officers and mobile gendarmes who cynically called themselves the Welcoming Committee. At one end of the Neuilly Bridge, groups of peacekeepers and riot police threw Algerians into the Seine after having beaten them unconscious. This method was then applied near Saint-Michel as well. At the Austerlitz station, a similar scene unfolded with bodies covered in bloody rags thrown into the Seine. Others were carried away to unknown destinations. The torturers acted with impunity, fully aware that they were shielded by their hierarchy. Of all of the victims pulled out of the Seine over the course of a month, one was positively identified. Her name was Fatima Bedar. She had both of her arms broken, and she was thrown off of the Pont Saint-Michel. Whether or not she was conscious during this event is unknown, but what is known is her name, her face, and what was done to her. What also is known is that this happened. There were photographs of the entire event. This happened because there was a police eyewitness account that was actually taken, written down, and published in a newspaper. And of course, this message never left the bridge. Here we drown Algerians. All of these factors made sure that this story never really left the public consciousness. It was taboo to speak about for the better part of 2 to 3 decades, but no one could say that it didn't happen. Of course, it would take until 1999 for all police records in France to be opened up for scrutiny. Yet, even with those resources, we still do not know just how many people died. And as of right now, there hasn't been any prosecutions for the participation in the killing. No cops, no politicians, no one has went to prison. And why was all of this done? In order to incite a reaction from the FLN that the French military and French government could point at as a reason for even more violence in Algeria, which didn't happen. The Algerian War was a failure. France could not control the territory, and international opinion was against them. There was a lot of pressure for France to let go of Algeria and all of their North African territories, but Algeria in particular was a massive loss for them. The French government, the French police department, and specifically Maurice Papon, went out of their way to kill innocent Algerians in the middle of Paris in order to incite a reaction so that they could have the chance to win a war. And instead of winning the Algerian War, they enacted one of the biggest massacres to ever occur in a Western democracy to this very day. I wanted to add an addendum to this long video. I wanted to end it there, that this was one of the most atrocious and largest massacres to ever occur in a Western democracy. But what has been interesting in my research is just how little the French government has done to actually acknowledge what happened on October 17th, 1961. No one has been held accountable for their participation in the killings because they fell under the general amnesty for crimes committed during the Algerian War. In 1990 through 1999, when all of the police records were open to the public and people were starting to do their own research about what happened on October 17th, Maurice Papon was pointed out as the main perpetrator of this entire event. But he wasn't alone. Yes, he ran the French police department. Yes, he was fully involved with the massacre that happened that night. But there were many other officials that let this happen. There were many other governmental bodies that let this happen. And to this day, none of them have been reasonably identified or acknowledged as a collaborator in this event. Only Maurice Papon. When it comes to acknowledgement and commemoration about this event, the city of Paris put up this plaque on October 17th, 2019, with all of the silhouettes of the victims who were thrown off of the Pont Saint-Michel bridge. If you were to try and see this memorial today, you would notice that the plaque on the bridge is completely gone, and the memorial itself has been moved off of the bridge because it kept being vandalized. Who's been responsible for the vandalization is unknown. Nobody knows who's doing it. There's speculation, and fingers have been pointed at the Paris Police Department, but no one really knows why someone would tear down this memorial. I'm sure that we could all surmise as to why, but really no one knows who's responsible. And when it comes to the words being placed on the bridge, "Here we drown Algerians," that has never stopped. That declaration has been there since 1961, has been put up every single time it's been washed off of the bridge, and will never go away until people are satisfied, until people feel that the right institutions and the right people have been pointed out and been held accountable for what happened 63 years ago. Even though this event might not have been widely known, it might have been suppressed in the press, and the majority of people involved never seeing jail time, none of that has actually stopped anyone from remembering what happened. And I think that this type of graffiti, this type of protest will never go away until everyone who was involved with this massacre has been rightfully pointed out. Will that happen? I have no idea. What I do know for certain is that this story is hardly told, and if we get this story out, if we tell the tale of what happened on October 17th, 1961, maybe justice will be served. At least that's what I think. Hello everyone, it's your boy Ailurus, and I have been gone for 45 days, working on Morbid Reality content, along with a whole lot of other things. And as you can tell, today's video only has one story. I made it a MorbidReality special because this story was 24 minutes long, and while it may have fit the typical MorbidReality content, format, I felt that the story should actually just be by itself. There's hardly any content about this event, and I felt like maybe it should be centered. So I really hope you guys enjoyed today's MorbidReality special. There's going to be even more MorbidReality this week, of course, after Christmas, with all of the shorter, stories being put right next to each other. This one was just such a monster that I felt that it definitely needed to be by itself. And why not have a special video for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day? So I really hope you guys enjoyed that. There's going to be more content coming your way this week. And I want to thank all of my Patreon supporters that make content like this possible, especially videos like this possible, where it's just gnarly from start to finish. Without your support, I wouldn't be able to do this, and thank you so much. Let's go ahead and give them a shout out. So a big thank you to Kate the Goat, AJ Flame, Big Brain Gamer, D the Wicker Beast, Arrow the Cat, Molly Mayhem, Beady Uzi, Yex, Quispy, Codman4372, Blacklist Gaming, user deleted from Planet, Seth is the 102, Twitch is lost, Dawnbreaker Drake, Traffic Racer 124, Fisherman, The Blurred Star, Mr. Sandman, Mike, That One Girl, Loving Tate, Tron Destroy 23, Code Connor Purvis, Size Federic, My Golden Experience, James Tucker, Primavera, BMX30, Cinnamon Sticks, The Fake Musician, Samantha Bellhart, Dundernass Hawk, and Noah. Thank you so much for your support. It is greatly appreciated. And if you want to help support the channel, there's 2 links in the description, one on my merch store and one on my Patreon. Both funds go directly into the channel so I can maintain what's happening here. And as always, stay zesty.